Hello and welcome to this week's Tourism Teacher Talk. Today we have a guest. It is Nigel Fell who's come to speak to us. Hi, Nigel.
Good day. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'll just introduce Nigel for you. Or actually, I'll let him introduce himself. Nigel, can you tell us a bit about you, a bit about your background?
Certainly. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I've been in the industry for 40 years now, so quite some substantial time. Varying degrees of the tourism industry in different sectors. 10 years working for international airlines, 18 years working for very large European tour operators at senior and board level, and currently 12 years running my own management consultancy in all different facets of the travel and tourism industry, primarily working with tour operators, governments and tourist boards on how to improve inbound tourism numbers. We're looking at about 85 projects so far since I started the consultancy 12 years ago, and thoroughly enjoying it.
Wow, great. So it sounds like you're a very busy man. You've got a lot going on.
Yeah, it's I'm sure we'll touch on COVID a bit later, but it's having as we all know, a significant impact on the travel and tourism industry globally. So the work has changed substantially from growth to crisis management and how we go about rebuilding and building back better when borders start hopefully open safely.
Yeah, we're all eagerly awaiting that day, aren't we?
We are. It's and depending whereabouts you are in the world, you've got a bit longer to wait, unfortunately. But it's important that it's done safely.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so one of your areas of expertise is cultural and heritage tourism. So can you give us an overview of this industry?
Certainly. Culture, and there's a slight subtle difference here in what I think we're going to be talking about as we go through this this conversation. Culture and heritage tourism is what I would call a niche market. It certainly is a market in its own right. So people wanting to travel to experience culture, different cultures, and go and see heritage assets in different countries and different regions of countries. But what's more important, and it's a far, far bigger market, is culture and heritage in tourism. So most people, when they go on holiday or take a trip abroad, will experience something of a different culture and a destination's heritage. They may not spend their entire holiday doing it, but they'll certainly want to see, taste, smell, touch something authentic that country has to offer. So culture and heritage tourism for me and the organisations I work with currently is absolutely vital, because don't forget, culture and heritage assets can be both tangible and intangible. So the intangible assets are things like customs, traditions, ceremonial dances, language and dialect. But you've got the tangible assets, heritage assets, such as you can see there, that beautiful shot of the Taj Mahal, art, history, statues, traditional dress. So they're very different areas of the industry, and most people, well, 95% of people, when they go on holiday, will experience some form of culture and heritage whilst they're on that trip. So it's vitally important that people understand the importance of culture and heritage and the role it has to play as we come out and build back from COVID.
I think it's really, really important actually that you pointed out there that actually not all cultural and heritage tourism is intentional, perhaps. You know, when I wrote my PhD, I had a whole section on sort of traveling for culture and heritage. And a lot of the literature is all about people who are traveling for those purposes, but actually you might just travel for a beach holiday, but you are consequently, because of where you're going and what you're doing, you're exposed to these things, so you encounter it anyway. even though that wasn't the main intention of your trip. And I think that's a bit of the tourism industry that's often forgotten about.
Certainly, and take the destination I am at the moment, which is Cyprus. We've eaten a great deal of Cypriot food since we've been here. It's cooked in a traditional Cypriot way, and you may or may not be aware that there's been a fight. The Cypriot government have been fighting to get halloumi recognised as being traditionally Cypriot, which means that no other entity in the world can call that type of product or have halloumi in the name. Now, why is that important? Because food and food elements and aspects and styles of cooking can be specific to a country or a region or a place. So the halloumi industry is worth about 240 million euros today for Cyprus, but the estimates are that it'll be worth from anything from 750 million to €1 billion.
Wow.
So you can see even one small element like a food product, one simple product like cheese, can be critically important for the income of a country.
Yeah, I love halloumi. I have a problem there with those stats. I have it imported into China.
Interesting what you were saying about part of your PhD being the relevance of culture and heritage tourism. We asked 100 industry leaders, so that's people in government, tourism ministers, chief execs of tourism boards, business owners and business leaders from all facets of the travel and tourism industry. What does culture and heritage in tourism mean to you or for you? And we actually got, all by the shouting, 100 different answers. Wow. So what that tells us is there is still a lack of clarity about why culture and heritage is a vital part of the tourism industry and why it needs to be taken a great deal more seriously by governments and tourist boards and everyone in the industry, including those that travel. Because when you go abroad, you will experience something that hopefully will enrich your life. And invariably, that's going to be a cultural or heritage experience. I mean, if you were to go and take a walk around the Taj Mahal, you'll never forget it. It's one of the things you'll remember for the rest of your life. And it's something you will not and cannot see anywhere else. So it's about making wonderful, everlasting memories. But when you go on holiday, when people go on holiday, invariably, and I'm a perfect example, it's the people I meet, the places I see, and the things I experience that I remember. It isn't the beach, it isn't the hotel, it isn't the cruise ship. It's the place, and it's the people and the experiences while I'm away that the things that I remember the most, and hopefully most tourists do.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and that's something that the guide. Sorry, not the guidebooks, the holiday brochures often miss out, isn't it?
It is. I mean, if you're going to go to Spain, you'll probably have a paella, and there are many other wonderful dishes in Spain. But you'll also have Spanish beer. Of course, you're going to go and spend some time on a beach, and hopefully go out and see some other amazing Spanish culture. But you're right in that not many people will just go on a culture and heritage trip, but they will undoubtedly take in some culture and heritage as part of a trip.
Yeah. So moving on to our next question then, why is, I think you've already touched on this, why is cultural and heritage tourism, the industry itself, why is it so important?
Because it has a direct impact on the lives, the well-being and the health and wealth of everyone involved in it, in every country, in every village and region all over the world. We are all probably, if we work in the industry as long as we have, 1 in 10 jobs globally is in the travel and tourism industry. Those jobs are vitally important for people of those destinations. Often developing countries are the areas that rely on inbound tourism more than developed countries. So when we talk about the importance of culture and heritage in tourism, it directly impacts tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives and their overall well-being. So when you and I go on a holiday, we have to be very careful and very aware that when we travel, we try to travel as well as we can. We try to leave a lighter footprint. And I know we're going to be getting onto sustainability a little bit later in the discussion, but that's also a critical area of why we talk about culture and heritage in tourism. But business also has a very, very big role to play. For too long, big businesses have stripped out significant amounts of the revenue that are paid by tourists when they go on their holiday. Yeah. Very little of that revenue is actually left where it's needed the most. And that's on the ground with people and their local communities who are the custodians of those places and things that we go and visit. But they are the ones that are left with the smallest amount of revenue. Now, we all know that COVID's had a devastating impact. Imagine being in a developing country and having your only source of income cut off and have no other way of earning revenue at all in any other stream. So developing countries are struggling badly. We know the Western world, traditional Western world, is struggling badly, but it's what's happening in Far East, Latin America, certain parts of Southeast Asia is utterly devastating for those destinations.
Yeah, I mean, I've read stories about like in Bali, they've turned tourist resorts into like food banks and things like this because people are just desperate because that is their main income there.
They are
really, really. And I think people are caught up on the impacts of COVID that are in their immediate surroundings because it's impacting everybody on a personal level and an economic level, that people aren't necessarily exposed to the wider problems in the rest of the world. And a lot of people, I think, don't realize actually that, you know, their own hardship is multiplied in developing countries.
You're absolutely right. But there's a significant ray of hope. I'm ever the optimist. So let's talk about some of the positives that may happen and hopefully will happen as we unlock out of COVID. Research showed clearly, many different reports, there's too many to name here today, but many reports showed before COVID that people wanted to travel more sensitively. Sustainability is growing in the mindset. They want to leave a lighter footprint and they want to have a more meaningful experience when they do travel. That's only amplified since COVID and during COVID. So a far greater proportion now, depending on the different surveys and academic research you read, upwards of 75 to 80% of all people surveyed want a more culturally enriching experience when they take their next trips abroad. But what they want is authenticity. They don't want something that's made up or being created. If you think about a disaster scenario, what none of us want, what I certainly don't want when I go overseas, is I don't want a homogenized holiday. I don't want to see every high street town everybody's looking and feeling the same. I want to go and see and experience something new and different. And I think that's one of the reasons that they say that travel gets in your blood. And once it's in, you want to seek out more greater experiences.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Nigel. My daughter's just crying outside. I'm just going to grab her really quickly.
That's quite all right.
So sorry, Saya wants to come and join the live stream.
Hi.
I think they're really important points, and I've actually written a couple of articles on economic leakage in tourism, which you mentioned before, and also on authenticity. And I think authenticity is a really interesting one actually, because people they say they want an authentic experience, but they don't always want it to be entirely authentic. Like, for example, but they don't realize this. I went on a trip in Goa and it was called the Jungle Book Tour some years ago now. And they took you on an authentic, as they said, village in the jungle. And you rode elephants, which was some years ago a lot more accepted than it is now. bathed them, and you stayed in a mud hut, which was apparently how they made their own homes there. And you took a tour around a village. And I was with a big group of tourists, and I was doing my master's at the time in tourism management. So I think I was perhaps looking out for things in through a slightly different lens than your average package holiday tourist. Because most of these people had sort of booked packages through Thomas Cook or Monarch, I think were the two big players at the time in the area. So they weren't tourism experts. And they took us to this village and they said, these children can't speak any English. Can you teach them a nursery rhyme? And every nursery rhyme that the people tried to teach them, the kids knew every single word. Because clearly they do this every single day. It's a show. And you got to go in a house and have a tour around this one house. But actually, if you looked at the house next door, they had a really big sky dish. And, so they clearly did have a few mod cons like that. But that was hidden away from the tourists. And what they saw was the authentic building. But what is authentic? Is it authentic to pretend they don't have these mod cons that the rest of the world have moved on to have? And then in the evening, we had dinner. And I turned around and there was like a buffet of food. And I turned around and I said to one of the staff who was serving the food up, "Oh, are chips authentic going food?" And he just looked completely flabbergasted that I'd asked such a question. And I was laughing to myself thinking, of course it's not. They're serving up chips because they know that the Westerners like chips. And there was also some going curry and some rice, etc. But I found it very funny. And so that, people say they want an authentic experience, but in India, a lot of people would prefer not to have spicy food for breakfast if they're from the UK, because it's not really to our palates, and we'd prefer to have a Western toilet in our hotel and things like this. So I think authenticity is a really interesting discussion to have, actually.
Yeah, and as we said before, I think that the culture and heritage as a tourism niche market certainly has a place. But going to most people wanting an element of their holiday to be culturally enriching is probably where I sit. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had traveling was spending 1 week living with an Aboriginal family in Northwest Australia. And we lived under the stars in a swag, a traditional Australian sleeping kit. No four walls, no protection. You didn't need it. It was 25 degrees in the evening, sleeping under the Milky Way, sitting around the campfire, sharing stories. I'm sharing my stories with this wonderful Aboriginal family, and they're sharing theirs with me. And then when we were hungry, we went out and either picked, found, or caught our food.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
That is something I will never forget. And when you talk about your particular example of how authentic is authentic, I've spent some time in sub-Saharan Africa, and I got to know over a 4-year period, and I got to know a couple of families that live and have lived there all their lives, were born and raised in both Lusaka and at Victoria Falls, and being asked to go and share a meal with them in their house is a genuinely authentic thing to do. Yes, it's very much like a Western house. It's what you expect a house to have. It's got all the facilities a modern house would have. So we're not talking traditionally about just going and staying in a hut or traditional village. It's about engaging with real people, local people that call that place home.
Yeah, and there's so many different degrees, I think, to experiencing culture and heritage, isn't there, as well? There's the sort of full-on staying in an Aboriginal's home, and then there's the going to see a cultural show or just tasting the food. So yeah, it's a really interesting industry, and it's something that I think there's definitely an area or there's scope for a lot more research and a lot more work in that area, I think.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to be touching on a little bit of that as we go through this discussion. But what we found, even in the most developed countries, is that most governments all over the world haven't really understood the true value of inbound tourism to their respective country. What COVID has done is opened everybody's eyes, because we are now all in exactly the same position for the first time ever. So we're all starting from a blank piece of paper. How do we start up? When do we start up? When is it safe to do so? They really understand the value now of the dollar, yen, euro, pound that comes into their country. And for many, many years, they've just taken inbound tourism for granted. And unfortunately, it's the people that are paid the least in the lower paying service jobs, traditionally in hospitality and the wider travel and tourism industry, that are feeling it the most in every part of the world. So every time we go abroad in future, it would be great if people thought about how they could leave a little more revenue in those communities with those people that are providing those services. And we as WeTech are helping governments understand that and what they need to do to make that happen on a long-term basis. And that's what sustainability is really about. How can it be done on a long-term basis, and rather than a quick grab, which is what many destinations are currently looking at. They're saying we need to get back to things the way they were before. Well, the way things were before wasn't working. That was never sustainable indefinitely. So what can we do to encourage them to do it more sustainably, which by default will mean it has a long-term lifespan. And those people that rely on that revenue will have a far greater quality of life if they decide to do that and build back better.
Yeah. I think, COVID really has brought to people's attention about sort of shopping local and helping local people. And I think one of the biggest problems with sustainability is a lack of education. And I remember, again, I think I was doing my master's at the time, and I went to the Gambia. And when I booked my flight and my hotel independently, so it didn't come as a package, and there was an option to add on a transfer. And I studied tourism, environment and development. So I looked very deeply into the sustainability side of things at the time. And I remember thinking, no, I'd rather give my money to a local taxi man than give it to Thomas Cook, who are going to take most of it and put me on a bus and only give us a fraction of that to the local community. But I had that awareness and that knowledge because I was studying it. Whereas a lot of people, the general public, they don't give it a thought really. They're not exposed to this information, and it's not. If they thought about it, you can work that out. It's fairly obvious, but people don't, because it's not on the forefront of their mind. And I think that COVID has really brought this to people's attention, and hopefully people won't forget, and they'll continue this sort of attitude of shopping local and take that on their travels as well as at home, as many people are doing at the moment.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Hayley. And if we look at the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, which is the entity I'm working with globally, there is what we call an area which is, we call it bridge the gap. All tourism policy comes via government, and government usually receive their guidance from consultants and academics who create a tourism policy for that destination at great expense. Now, most people that have responsibility, I can't say every country because it wouldn't be true, but most countries, the respective minister that has responsibility for tourism knows nothing about tourism. They're not educated in tourism. So they're making decisions on things created by someone else without a broad and deep understanding of what it can and will mean. And this impacts, as we talked before, about developing countries more than most. Where there is a gap that we try to bridge at WeTech is we have people that write and have written and will write government policy on travel and tourism. We have a bunch of academics that work for us that help research that. We have policy writers that put it in a language that the government needs to see it in. But the gap that we talk about is it very rarely translates into a language that business owners, product and service providers can actually deliver. And one of the jobs I did on my tour of duty when I was in Zambia, working for the Dutch government on this type of project, it was my job to get the tourism policy out of the drawer, out of the tourism minister's drawer, work with the chief executive of the tourist board, but engage all travel and tourism stakeholders, including local communities. And that's what's really important here. If you engage with them, they become part of the process of endorsement. And if they have buy-in and are involved at the very beginning when policy is being set, they become the greatest ambassadors you can have as a country, as a destination, because they are positive about what's happening with them, not to them. Local communities don't like having tourism done to them. They want to welcome people, but they want to be part of the decision-making process. So what we do, we call it WETAC, the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, is we work with governments, tourist boards, travel and tourism business owners, products and service providers, and local communities to help deliver an effective, sustainable, long-term tourism development plan. Once that plan's been created, we then educate, a word that comes up and is coming up a lot in this discussion. It is about education. Educate all of those through the process and through the line about how important it is, why it is so important, and what you can do to help yourselves. We have an ongoing mentoring program, so we don't just undertake some presentations and then walk away and leave you. We will stay with you for as long as you need that help. We're all working virtually. These guys can contact us whenever they wish and ask for advice on what to do and how to do it. So to give you an example, we're currently working with a very large or major European city on a carrying capacity study, but also a revenue capture analysis. Because unless a destination understands how much money it's coming in and how much money is leaving, you can't work out how much revenue is staying in your city or your country. So there's a great deal we're doing at WETAC to educate, to create, guide, mentor, and help them on the long term. Do it properly.
That's really, really interesting, actually. Especially, you know, the way you put it about how governments will be consulted and they're not necessarily experts, because I mean, this is an area that most people probably aren't familiar with. So it's really interesting. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure.
We should probably move on to the next question, which is, what does the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage do?
Well, we've just covered nearly all of that, I think, in terms of the bridging the gap, working with governments and tourist boards. We have something called a knowledge hub, where some very clever people beaver away at research projects and look at how we can, a government or a destination can use what assets it has to greater benefit in the long term. And I thoroughly enjoy the whole education process. So it's working with people on the ground. And going back to Zambia, I coached and mentored a number of very small SMEs. So they either had up to 1 to 5 staff. When you work with an entity like that, they don't feel as though they're doing it on their own. When they've got someone to bounce ideas off, it's great for them and it's great for us. But when you see that organization employing people, 2, 3, 4 people, so potentially doubling or tripling the size of their organization, every time someone gets a job in a developing country, it's 10 to 15 people that now have the ability to eat better.
Yeah.
That is the difference of tourism done well. It can be such a wonderful force for good, but governments need to want that, and they need to understand it, and they need to allow people that know how to do it, help them to do it as well as it can be done. And that's what WETAC's here to do.
Yeah, great. Well, it sounds like you're doing lots of great work.
Lots to do.
Yeah, lots to do. I saw your logo on your website, and I read a bit about it, and I thought that's really interesting. So maybe some of the people who are watching might like you to give us a bit of a explanation. What does the logo mean, and why was it designed that way?
Yes, well, no credit for this is down to me whatsoever. It's down to our president, a gentleman called Chris Flynn. When I first saw the logo, I knew it looked catchy, but I couldn't make out what it was either. But it's actually been designed to represent humanity. What what the logo actually is a molecular structure of human DNA.
Wow.
So it runs through every single person on this planet. The colors are very symbolic too, because they were the ochres and the deep reds were the first pigments ever used by mankind in works of art.
Wow, that was fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's so great that you've put, well, not you personally, but your organization's put so much thought into why the logo's designed like that. I love it. That's great.
And thank you. I mean, you are one of the first people to give us the opportunity to explain what it's all about. It does mention it on our company's website, but it for me, when he shared the story with me, it just made perfect sense. It was just a wonderful fit.
Yeah, it's great. And I think, your logo says so much about your organization as well, doesn't it? And
Yes, it does.
yeah, very interesting. So what is the importance of sustainability? I know you've touched on this already within cultural and heritage tourism.
Yeah, it's what I would like, the point I'd like to get across on this particular issue is culture and heritage has taken millennia to create. It's taken hundreds of generations to form traditional ceremonies, dance, artworks, wonderful buildings like the one you're seeing in the picture, but they can be destroyed so very, very quickly in a blink of an eye. And the problem with that is once they're gone forever. And I'll give you an example. There was a gentleman who approached us a little while ago, a Rwandan gentleman, who was really concerned about traditional village dances throughout his country were being forgotten by the younger generation because they were leaving the villages and the towns to work in big cities because that's where the money was. But if no one's there to learn these traditional dances, it won't take long for them to be forgotten. So he wanted to put on a Rwandan dance festival where people from all over Rwanda, all different dance troupes, were invited to get together and gather and have a wonderful dance festival celebrating a particular part of Rwandan culture through dance. COVID scuppered that. But what he was able to do was to video them all. So, and put them out through social media channels. So at least there's now a recorded history of those dances. But what we would like to do when COVID has moved along and it's safe to do so, we would very much like to see that re-energized and actually hold it in real time and invite 30, 50, 100 Rwandan dance troupes to have a fantastic festival of Rwandan traditional dance.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Yeah.
So it's all about, but what's really important here is we touched on planning before. The importance of sustainability is all about effective planning. If governments don't plan to maintain what they have, protect and preserve it, they will disappear. When they start to disappear, fewer and fewer tourists will come because there's very little for them to see or do that's authentic. So
and
it's really
that's the problem especially in developing countries where they don't necessarily have the same levels of education available to them as in many Western areas, is they don't have a lot of organizations, companies, governments don't have the long-term thinking. They just see the dollar sign and think, yeah, let's jump in full steam ahead. But that doesn't always last, does it? And you need to think long-term. And even if that means taking a bit less money in the short term, over a longer period, you've got a much more profitable industry, haven't you? And that's the problem.
true.
Don't have this long-term planning, and hopefully, and this is one of the things that I've been saying throughout the COVID pandemic, is now's a chance to take a step back on all sorts of levels, from a top-down level, from a grassroots level. Take a step back and just reflect on what is my business, what is my industry, how has it worked so far, what can we change, because what else are people doing right now when they haven't got the tourists? So it's such a great time to just take that opportunity and reflect and hopefully reform once travel starts again. And I guess we'll see, won't we, how many people do just step, or how many sort of destinations do just kind of step back to where they were, and how many actually do show some positive change.
Well, government planning, a tourism development plan, that never happens overnight. They're usually 5, but more often 10-year plans. The trouble is governments don't last that long, usually. There's usually a changeover 2 or 3 times, and then they want it all changed again. So there needs to be a long-term view. And if we've got a couple of minutes, I can give you a perfect example of when you don't plan and it goes horrendously wrong. Easter Island is a perfect example. Easter Island is 3,000 miles away from its nearest landmass, which is Chile. So it's in the Pacific Ocean. There are 7,500 people approximately live on Easter Island, and they thought that tourism would be a wonderful way of generating some income that they didn't have traditionally. It wasn't known as a tourist destination. So in 2018-19, they welcomed 106,000 guests in that 12-month period. Sounds wonderful. What they forgot was that those tourists create 20 tons of waste a day. You're on an island that's roughly 100 square kilometers. So what do you do with that waste? You can burn it, which isn't environmentally friendly. You can dump it in the water, which is not great for a fish stock that you rely on to sustain you. Or you can bury it, again, not particularly good for crop growing, or you fly it out. And they were flying anything that was recyclable back on chartered aircraft back to Chile, 3,000 miles away. So the government hadn't planned to have 15 times its population come and visit its island.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And think people just, they don't realize about these kind of almost ripple effects of tourism. You just see what you see, but actually there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people don't realize. And bringing this to the forefront and bringing this to people's minds is so important.
We just need governments to listen and hopefully understand that the benefits that long-term but sustainable tourism policies can create.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to our next question. Tell us more about your work with tourism strategies. Why is tourism planning so important? So you've just kind of answered that more or less, I think.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of when something goes terribly wrong. It's so important to plan properly, and the ramifications and outcomes are horrendous. They don't bear thinking about. It's going to be long-term poverty for millions and millions of people, as opposed to the opportunity to create a good standard of living if it's done well.
Yeah. Well, that just emphasizes, doesn't it? Planning's super important, and you need to have that strategy in place, which does come from the top.
From the top is wonderful. I think what people forget is government create policy, but it has to be implemented by private businesses. So you have to bridge that gap that we spoke about before in making it understandable. So what translate a government policy into a simple language that anyone and everyone can understand, get on board with, buy in, and become a fantastic ambassador for your own country.
And the different stakeholders within tourism need to work together as well and cooperate. And I think that's often one of the problems, isn't it? That people or companies are working in isolation. They're just seeing their own business and their own work. And actually, if everybody's doing that, it doesn't gel together and it doesn't flow as well. And you need to have that integration and that sort of lineage there.
One thing I learned very early on in business is we all communicate in some way, shape or form. But effective communication is so critical for a government. Obviously, with what you do with academia, you have to get accurate information together. But it's what you do with that information. And if you're not able to translate it into living, breathing, manageable pieces, if you even to boil it down to effective KPIs, how do you manage it going forward? So setting very simple key performance indicators, helping to manage it, being there to mentor when things slightly go off track. What can we do to help pull it back online? So there's effective communication is a vital tool in doing anything properly, but let alone travel and tourism.
That's actually one of the things I've been trying to do through my website. Is there's a lot of important concepts and theories and examples and stories and things within the tourism industry, but a lot of it is not really accessible to the general public, either because it's written up in journals that you have to pay to access, or it's written in really complicated words that most people will lose interest or don't really understand it. So that's what I've been trying to do, is kind of take a lot of the complex stuff that I've been exposed to in my academic career and simplify that so that your everyday person knows what it means and why it's important. Yes, because I think that's so important, that that education, but education that's accessible to all as well.
Absolutely. We've mentioned, I think, the education word so much during this this last half hour. It is probably the single greatest opportunity. Governments, when we're talking to governments about how to do this properly, we call it knowledge sharing or upskilling. You have to be careful of the language you use. You use different language to governments as you do to the private sector. So for governments, we knowledge share, but to the public, the private sector, we educate and mentor.
Yeah. So we just had a comment pop up from Jitendra. He said, due to a lack of sustainable planning, lots of heritage buildings are now not in good condition.
And he's absolutely right. This in itself is a very, very big subject, but just to give you one very small example, pollution, rainwater, depending on the type of building and where that structure is, acid rain is starting to destroy thousands of buildings all over the world. And if you are not doing something about changing the climate that we live in, that's only ever going to get worse. And the money doesn't exist to continually patch up, restore and repair these buildings. Developing countries don't have the money to be able to do that. But that's a whole nother subject. But he's absolutely right. It's the buildings that we love and want to go and visit, and many we don't even know exist yet are currently being eroded away. And I'll give you another example. UNESCO obviously do a wonderful job about World Heritage sites, and becoming a World Heritage site is quite difficult. I think there's only just over 1,100 of them in the world. To put that into perspective, Zambia has one UNESCO World Heritage site, and that's Victoria Falls. Zambia as a country has 4,022 sites of cultural and heritage importance to it. I don't know anyone that can name any of those 4,022 apart from Victoria Falls.
Yeah.
So if the government don't have the facilities currently to maintain all of those, tourism can help. Inbound tourists that want to go to Zambia don't just go and see the things that appear top one or two things to see and do in Zambia. Go out and explore. There are so many fascinating things to see and do. Second highest waterfall in Africa is in Zambia.
That's another thing I do on my website as well, because I've kind of got the sort of more academic side of it, and then I've got my practical kind of things to do in destination. And when I travel somewhere, I do like to try and get out and see as much as I possibly can, and I will then compile that into an article for people. But I think all too often people only go to, there might be a handful of websites on the top page of Google who say the top 5 things to do, and that's all people will do. But often there are great places you can go and things you can see that people just don't really know about.
That's absolutely true. And the more you engage with local people and their respective communities, the more they will come to the fore. And the chances are that the person that shows you that wonderful thing to see and do will be someone from a local community.
Yeah.
And if those local communities aren't there because they can't sustain themselves there, the chances are that as custodians of that place may not be around for the next generation. So it's very important that we do try to travel more mindfully, be a little bit more inquisitive.
I think, you know, an important part of it as well is the management of these attractions. And I'll never forget when a guide offered to me when I went to Cairo, do you want to climb to the top of that pyramid? And, you know, the fact that they're letting people climb to the top of the pyramids and stones were falling and all sorts, you know, I just think was that absolutely awful. These are, you know, really important buildings and we want to preserve them. And, you know, they're not just letting tourists do this, you know, the local people are encouraging it. And I guess they're getting a bit of money for it. Which is their motivation, but that needs to be managed and stopped. And maybe it is more carefully managed now. I mean, this was probably 8 years ago, maybe. So perhaps it is more heavily regulated, but there are things like that all over the world. And so that, you know, there is a responsibility from the tourist, but also from the tourist attraction and the management levels, and perhaps the government as well. And yeah.
We touched on it earlier. It's important to involve each and every stakeholder to understand the true value. It's really very important.
So Jitendra has commented again, and he says over-tourism is also a major problem. Do you have any comments?
He absolutely is. And we touched on Easter Island as being just one example of over-tourism. But the ones that we all see and hear probably the most, certainly in the West, are places like the Taj Mahal at certain times of the year. If you look at the big cities like London, Amsterdam, Barcelona, the island of Santorini, it's never quite like it's shown on the brochure. The beaches in Thailand, the Thai government shut those beaches down because of over-tourism, because of the erosion of those facilities and capabilities. So over-tourism is a significant challenge, but they can be dealt with. Two very quick examples. Amsterdam has launched a process and policy of halting over-tourism. I'm not going to go into all the detail because it's quite complicated, but if you want to have a look at that as an example, that's a great example of what one city is doing to combat over-tourism. And the other benefit is rather than stop tourists going to a destination, so for example, Prague is a perfect example of over-tourism, absolutely packed. Prague is a beautiful city. There are many, many more beautiful cities and towns and villages 1 to 1.5 hours away from Prague on a train or in a car. So if you go to the Czech Republic, go to Prague for 2 or 3 days, and then go and spend another 1 or 2 days just outside Prague in a beautiful hillside village or another city with again, fantastic things to see and do and amazing restaurants. It doesn't all have to be about one place.
I went to Kutna Ora. I probably pronounced that totally wrong. And that was the most memorable part of my trip, and that wasn't even in Prague. It had I don't know if you're familiar, it's got a church made of bones.
I've heard of it. I haven't been. I've heard of it, yeah.
It was like an incredible experience, and most people don't go there and they've never heard of it. And yeah, promoting these things is an important part too, I think. And yeah, like you say, try and encourage tourists. Don't discourage them from visiting, but encourage them to visit other areas and not to all congregate in the same area.
And it's critical for culture and heritage tourism, as we've been talking about. Not all culture and heritage lives in a city. It can be outside in the regions and the provinces. The type of food they eat, the people you'll see, the way they live it can be very, very different just a couple of hours away from a major city. So it is important that you don't stop going to that destination. You think about other things to do in that destination. So over-tourism can be combated, and it can be combated to help local people in their respective communities that are desperate to see you and want to show you, want to look after you and host you, and they do it very, very well.
Yeah, really important points there. So what's the most interesting or rewarding project that you've worked on?
We have covered both of those, Hayley. I think I'm I'm a partner in an online trade training platform called Spinning Globe, which has been a wonderful thing to establish and work on with my colleagues. I've worked with my good friend and an old associate, Chris, on WeTac now for about 6 or 7 months. And what's impressed me about WeTac is the sheer amount of uptake it's had on platforms like LinkedIn. So when Chris started, it's only been going 2 years because there was no other organization in the world that had a focus on culture and heritage globally. So he started it with using his own money. COVID obviously set that back somewhat, but what it's allowed us to do is look at our reach. And from a year or so ago, when we had 24 followers, we now have coming up to 16,500 on LinkedIn on one platform alone.
Wow.
But what's wonderful for us to see is the huge depth and breadth of the different types of individuals and organizations that are engaging with us. So every day we'll see academics following WeTac. We see government officials, tourist boards, tour guides, hotel receptionists. Anybody and everybody who has an interest in travel and tourism is coming to WeTac because they understand the true value of what cultural and heritage as part of a tourism itinerary can do and benefit everybody. It can benefit everyone in the tourism industry. Yeah. So I'm very proud of this piece of work that Chris and I and the rest of the team are doing. But I'm also very, very proud of the work that we did in Zambia, helping some of those people have now become personal friends. And as soon as COVID's over, my wife and I will be traveling down and spending some time with them. We've met some wonderful people in sub-Saharan Africa, Zambia in particular. So I can't wait to go back and see what it's like, and if necessary, do what we can to help rebuild.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We've got a LinkedIn user. They haven't put their name, but they've said thought-provoking stuff regarding Zambia and Prague in a post-COVID environment. How could tour operators be encouraged to promote these lesser-known cultural attractions instead of sticking with the popular destinations that will bring in much-needed money more quickly?
And that's a very good question, and thank you for that. I would encourage any tour operator. You are going to have mainstream tour operators that do what we call fly and flop holidays, 2 weeks on a beach. That's what it is, and so be it. But there are more and more tour operators all over the world now that want a more authentic and unique experience to be able to offer their clientele. Why is that important? Because if every tour operator is offering exactly the same thing, you are then only able to compete on price. And when you compete on price, it becomes a commodity. And a commodity has very little value once it's been commoditized. It's always a rush to the bottom, the lowest common denominator, and which usually means the lowest price. Lower the price, the less you're leaving in that community that desperately needs and wants that revenue. So the tourist boards, if you are a tour operator of any shape and size, talk to your tourist board of a market that you're either in now about expanding out the products and services that you offer, or talk to a tourism board to a destination that you think you'd like to expand into. Tourism boards have a wealth of knowledge, as you'd expect, about their own destination. They will be able to steer you and guide you. If it's not a service or product you can offer on the ground yourself, i.e. your own staff, there are plenty of entities such as DMCs, destination management companies, based in those countries who employ local people. And no one can show you around like a local person can. So I would encourage anyone, any tour operator, to go and look at different things in different parts of the world to give you a USP when you go to market. But make sure you do it well and properly.
Talking of local people, Deanna's left us a comment, and she says that she's a certified UNESCO World Heritage Guide. Can she have more information on the spinning globe that Nigel talked about?
Yes, certainly. I mean, if you go onto spinningglobe.com, you'll see there it's a B2B trade training platform, and that takes you through. You have to log in and register, because obviously we need to track what you're doing. And what Spinning Globe does is there's no other training platform in the world that does this. We work with tourist boards and products to take you on a linear journey as though you were taking that trip yourself. So through the slides you go through and the video you watch, any form of interaction, imagery that's available today is part of that linear journey. So for example, the one I looked at only 2 days ago was a new one launched on Puerto Rico. So it tells you how far away Puerto Rico is, for example, the UK, which airlines fly there. When you arrive in Puerto Rico, it takes you to your hotel. The hotel has a chance then to show its product and its service by taking you on a trip around that hotel. Then the following day, you go out and see all the wonderful things there are to see and do in Puerto Rico in a typical itinerary, in a linear journey. So spinningglobe.com, and you'll see probably about 30 or 40 what we call them VFAMs, virtual fam trips, on that platform. We have a consumer version, which we only launched a couple of months ago, called VTrip. So consumers can take these journeys too, and it can give them ideas of things they can see and do they might not have thought of on a particular trip in different parts of the world.
Really interesting. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So what have we got next? What do you think the future of cultural and heritage tourism might look like?
When I read that question earlier, Hayley, I sincerely hope that people travel a little more sensitively, and by that I mean be aware of where they're going, understand that culture. If it's not acceptable to do a certain thing in that particular culture, please don't do it. We've all heard some very upsetting stories of people doing things they shouldn't be doing in certain parts of the world, and having a tap on the shoulder from the police and saying, can you please come with me this way, please? What you're doing's not allowed in my country. Please be culturally aware and sensitive.
I think the big question with that, though, is whose responsibility is it to educate the tourists? Because often they are naive and they don't realise that, people are walking through the malls in a bikini in Dubai and they don't realise that that's inappropriate, because in the UK, it's a lot more accepted, or the USA, or wherever they might come from. So whose responsibility is it to tell them this and to teach them?
It's a really interesting question. For me, if you're going to be booking it through a tour operator, I think the tour operator has some responsibility to make you aware of the things you shouldn't be doing. There's a wonderful opportunity when you're flying to that destination for there to be some form of information on that aircraft that you can read or watch or see on the video screens, or pick it up in an onboard brochure or a document. They could leave it in hotels when invariably you're going to stay in a hotel, or in accommodation. You could have a sheet of things that you might need to be aware of in a hotel. So there are a number of touch points where you can do that. But I would also like to think that if you're going to take a holiday, you do a little bit of research yourself. What things do you want to see and do when you go? And just have a look.
Yeah, I mean, there's people like you and I would do a lot of research, but there are people who,
of course,
they're not bothered about where they're going. They just know, Dubai's a place where it's got sunny weather in the winter, UK winter. I'm going to book a fancy hotel and go, and I'm not going to look much else into it, And there are definitely many places where we can educate the tourists and teach them about some behaviours that maybe aren't acceptable or even legal in the place that they're going. But like you gave the example on the aircraft, for example, but ancillary revenue is so big for airlines. Are they going to take out a slot that they could get money for an advert on their IFE screens and put in an educational video or clip or whatever that they're not going to make any profit from? And I think that some of this needs to come from the government level, and that if it's a national airline, the government can say, we want you to put this short clip in or whatever, and they say to hotels that you suggested in hotels, we want you to put this information. But I think unless that pressure is there, those, you know, the different stakeholders aren't going to invest their energy and their money into that, because there's other more profitable things they could be using their time and their, you know, their resources to do.
I completely agree with you, Hayley, but there needs to be a break in the circle somewhere. Someone I would think can take ownership and responsibility for it. I think an airline's a great place to start, but I do take on board that they may have other objectives to achieve. I've just noticed a wonderful comment here by Deanna, who is a tour guide, and of course, what better source to get incredible detailed information about a place you're going to see and visit from a highly knowledgeable tour guide. And tour guides are one of the standout people that follow us on LinkedIn. From all over the world, different facets, because they know and understand how important culture and heritage is to them, because a great deal of it's what they talk about, and the knowledge, the incredible knowledge they have that they share, whether it be about building, artwork, wildlife, land, whatever it is, they'll know more about that than anyone else. So thank you for that, Deanna, and you're absolutely right. Talk to someone who knows.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So I think this is my last question now. What advice can you give to students? Because I have a lot of teachers who often share these videos with their students afterwards, or
Yes.
anyone who is interested in working in this area of tourism. What advice could you give them?
Again, I love this question when I first saw it, and I thought back as to when I was a young lad in shorts, and what I didn't actually plan to get into travel and tourism. I happened to be someone who was fascinated by aeroplanes, and I kind of fell into travel and tourism when I was 17. What I would say to someone who is looking at tourism as an industry, I guess I've got 4 questions that I would ask you. Why have you chosen tourism? Answer the why first. What is it about the tourism industry that makes you want to invest 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your life learning more about it and having a career in it? What area of the industry is it you think that will appeal to you, and why is that the case? So is it tour operating? Is it products? Is it services? Is it tour guiding? Is it working in the hospitality hotel industry? Is it working for an airline? What is it that you what area of the industry would you really like to work in? Where do you see yourself being in 5 to 10 years time? Do you actually have a plan? Now, I wish I'd asked myself these questions when I first started at 17, and I didn't. So my trajectory has been almost like a pinball machine. And I now, running my consultancy, truly value the experiences I've had, but I would never have predicted being a consultant. The path I've taken has allowed me to do this role because I've had such a diverse career in the industry. And the 4th question is, how are you going to get there? One example I'll give you is I used to work for Europe's largest outbound tour operator, and believe it or not, it was a company based in the northwest of England, and I had 650 staff working for me in a call center, and we had an open door policy. So if my door was open, anyone could come in at any time and ask me anything. During the course of my time there, 5 people came into my office and said, Nigel, I would like to do this thing, or I'd like your help with getting to the next level and the next role and next position in the company. How do I go about doing that? How can you help me? Those 5 people advanced quicker than anyone else in that company because they took the opportunity to engage. They made it known that they wanted to learn more. They wanted more responsibility. They, of course, wanted the higher paycheck that went with it. And I had no problem with that. But what encouraged me was they actually stepped up and said, can you help me? I want to do something different. I want to grow in a larger position. I want more responsibility. I want to change direction. Can you help me? Don't be afraid to ask anybody for help. I'd like to think that most people are here to help you. So I'm more than happy to give anyone advice as and when and if I can, because people were there to give it to me, and it really helped me through my career.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. So Sebastian's left us a comment. He says, in developing countries, the main obstacle is the cost of maintenance, even though locals are aware that they are not able to meet the expenses. Now the situation like the pandemic causes distress in the cultural and heritage destinations due to shortage of visitors.
It does, and thank you for that, Sebastian. We were talking about that earlier, Hayley, in that it's a great leveler, and by that, and I don't mean that in a good way. The world is suffering in a way it hasn't suffered for at least a generation, but it's impacted every single country in almost exactly the same way, depending on how they've handled it and are moving through it. But it is always the developing countries that suffer the most, which is why WeTac in particular, we want and actively encourage those governments to talk to us. There's no obligation. Come and talk to us. You have nothing to lose. We are here to help you help your people. If your nation is able to generate an income through tourism, or a significant proportion of your nation are able to generate an income through tourism, plan it properly. We can help you do that, because if you plan it properly, it'll be a long-term strategy that will last for generations. If you go for the quick grab, that's all it will be. There'll be peaks and troughs of revenue income and revenue outflow, but do it properly on a long-term sustainable way. It will benefit your nation and the health and wealth of your nation, because health also is very important. Not many developing countries have paid for healthcare. So tourism dollars, pounds, euros, yen, all help the health and wealth of a nation, but it can help so much more if it's done better.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important note to end on. Thank you so much, Nigel. I think that's been really interesting. This is the longest LinkedIn Live talk I've done.
I apologise. Once I get started, I'm very passionate about it. It's a wonderful subject, and thank everyone that's come in with comments. And I'm sure we couldn't get to all of them, but it's been a wonderful session, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to share why this subject is so critically important for the future of our industry.
Wow, thank you very much. So next week, I will be doing a LinkedIn Live talk with David Gordon. He's going to be talking to us about how to be successful in travel journalism. So if you are interested in the travel journalism field, whether that's blogging or publishing in print, do tune in. It will be on Facebook and on LinkedIn on Friday, the 23rd of April, 4 p.m. China time, because I'm obviously based in China, and 9 a.m. UK time. And if you enjoyed the talk, you can follow Tourism Teacher. So I'm on Twitter, Facebook. If you're a teacher, there's a Facebook group for travel and tourism teachers and lecturers, Instagram, and this video will be on IGTV and YouTube, so you can subscribe and follow there as well. So thank you very much, Nigel. And if anybody has any comments or questions for Nigel, you can leave us a comment, on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and he will see it, or feel free to drop him a message.
Thank you, and follow WeTac on LinkedIn, WTACH.org. Thank you.
Okay.